But the last video was mainly looking at velocities and kinetic energy, or KE, and it's expressed in joules. Okay, that's kind of a nerdy thing. You science nerds know what that is. And in college, everything was in joules. It's a metric type of measurement. Anyway, it doesn't really matter too much what the units are, as long as you can compare units to like units in the research, and most of the research is in metrics. So that's why you can see in the previous video, I listed kinetic energy at the bottom of each experiment. Okay, now one of the things I've read in the past is that some scientists are convinced that they can determine what the speed of a projectile was, or the velocity, based on the impact fracture. Okay, I read at least one study that is studying the fracture mechanics of these impact fractures to determine the velocity. And a lot of these, well, I shouldn't say a lot, but the ones that I was looking at, the studies are concerned with velocity. And they're saying some impact fractures cannot be made at low velocities. Okay. Now, it was a while ago since I read those. They may go into kinetic energy, but I think velocity is a too simple a measure for the impact fractures. Okay. A lot of things influence impact fractures, and impact fractures can be made in various ways. Like, let's say you have a point that looks like this, and you have an impact fracture which you assume is at the tip. Okay, and you assume it's hafted, and the original point would look something like this. Hafted like this, and then this is fired, and then the impact crushes the tip and causes an impact fracture. They don't consider the possibility that the point might actually be hafted the other way, with the rounded end in front and the point inside the haft. So when the impact happens, it's not the impact that causes the fracture, but the actual socket can cause the impact fracture here. And they can actually go this way, like a flute, sort of. You know what I mean? I haven't seen any exploration of this type of impact fracture. Okay. Now, when comparing kinetic energies, okay, you would think that a dart has the most because of its velocity, which makes sense, right? It makes sense for an atlatl dart to have high velocity and high kinetic energy. But what I want to show is not only do the atlatl darts have high kinetic energy because of the velocity, but handheld spears can produce high amounts of kinetic energy even though their velocities aren't very high. Same with our hypothetical Tomahawk. Okay. Because of the weight. High weight. Now, kinetic energy is affected more by velocity. I think the formula is 1/2 the mass times velocity squared. That equals the kinetic energy. Velocity will affect the formula a lot more than the mass. But as you'll see, I've got my notes. I'm going to compare notes. And you'll see that these handheld devices, maybe even a knife, I haven't tested that one yet, but I'm pretty sure I can achieve some high kinetic energy. The way you figure kinetic energy for a projectile is different from a handheld device. Okay. The handheld is a little more complicated because you have the mass of your hand. You also have the, especially with the club type, you have the pivoting motion. It's not a projectile. With the club, it'll pivot. So it doesn't take very much energy to modify this arc. Okay. And with a handheld, you also have to add the weight of the hand and the arm and the body when using a thrusting spear. Okay. Now this is all getting kind of involved, but I want to explore this because in these studies, these archaeological studies, they just take liberties with statements and kind of make blanket statements to try to convince you that they know how these flakes were made. And I'm going to try to present other possibilities to be included in these discussions. Okay. So my notes from today on the earlier tests with the running speed plus the thrusting on the spear, I got 34.8 feet per second. Okay. And the spear by itself with the little cross piece was 818 grains. Okay. And just with that, I get a kinetic energy of 46 joules. Okay, it's in joules. Now, if I look at my old study here that I had from the previous video, they do have kinetic energy here in this column. All right. So the mass of these darts plus the velocity. There's two velocities here. I don't think I was very clear in the other video. The film velocities are higher than the radar velocities. Okay, so we'll go with the film velocities on most of these. All right, kinetic energy on this dart here, grams, 88 grams, which is grains is 1367 at 53 miles an hour. Okay, produces a kinetic energy of 20. Now the thrusting spear, not including the weight of my arm and some of the momentum behind the rest of my body, this is 46, so it's twice as much kinetic energy as that. That's 20, and this produced a penetration of 5.5 inches. Okay. Now, if you're using a comparable size dart point and spear point, the surface area that is penetrating is about the same. Okay. The spear might be thicker in the shaft, but we can use the same point itself for both the spear and the atlatl dart. Alright, so you can see that with the kinetic energy of a spear, it should penetrate even deeper than the dart if you did it like I was doing it. You know, run up to the animal and then strike it to do a killing blow. Okay, that's probably the only way you can run up to the animal and stab it. Alright, but anyway, the point is there has to be well, it doesn't have to be, but it makes you think that there should be a difference, maybe in the hafting arrangement between something that doesn't have as much kinetic energy and something that does. All right, and you would think maybe that the hafting element of a spear would have to be stronger than the dart. Or maybe it's the other way around. Maybe the dart has to be stronger because of the high velocity compared to the spear, which has low velocity. That's why I'm getting into this, because maybe the hafting element will be able to help us through induction to determine whether it was a spear point or a handheld spear point, a thrusting spear, or an lateral dart. So I've shown, just with me being out of shape and I'm 56 years old, I can produce a kinetic energy of 46 joules with thrusting spear. Okay, mainly because of the weight of the spear, I think. All right, which is this is 12,000 grains. 12,000, yeah, compared to 1,300, so it's like 10 times the weight. Not quite, but it's almost. Let's see, 10 times this would be 13,000. This is 12,500, so you get the idea. All right. Now, one thing also that the researchers don't discuss too much is the difference between combat and hunting tools. Okay. Everything is focused on hunting and not much on combat. But I think, and I may be proven wrong about this, I think combat is going to produce more incentive to make specialized weapons. All right? Because defeating a human is a lot more difficult than defeating an animal. You can catch animals with all sorts of different ways. And you can gang up on an animal and shoot it with multiple projectiles. Whereas with a human, you can gang up on a single human, but usually they don't operate that way. Especially in warrior groups, it's usually more than one against more than one. Okay, and humans don't want to be isolated. They'll avoid being isolated at all costs, and it's very difficult in combat with a human compared to trying to take down an animal. Okay, as long as you got the ability to close in with the animal, you can shoot a projectile or you can force it into a trap. All right, that's what the advantage is on an animal. They're a lot faster than a human target. So, getting off on a tangent, what I'm going to be concentrating on mainly is what are the combat ramifications, or what things would indicate that these tools were used in combat instead of hunting. That's one thing. Another thing is, I think, as a hypothesis, stone projectile points were mostly for fighting. Okay, either human to human or human against predators. Okay, I think the primary, this is a hypothesis. I might be proven wrong, or might be shown to be wrong. Stone projectile points are mostly for fighting, human or human against predators, either in a self-defense or offensive way. Okay, as a goal. Hunting, there's many different ways you can take down an animal. You can do it directly, like direct fire of a projectile. You can trap. You can domesticate, or semi-domesticate. so that all you need to do is tame the animal enough that you don't have to chase it. It's close enough that you can deliver a killing blow without any effort. Okay, you can trapping and baiting probably go in the same boat, and so forth. The development of projectile points is really not as essential in this arena of hunting as it is in combat. All right, because it's so much more difficult to fight another human or a predator. These are usually, herd animals. Okay, hunting is usually done on herd animals or small game. Okay, or fishing. These types of tools are quite different than combat tools. Okay, so that's where I'm going with that. So on these Baker points, there's two different types, and I was trying to figure out through this series just some basic things. Why the difference in the base structure, and why the difference in shape. Another thing is these ears, on either side of the notch, they are very delicate. Okay, I took this point out of the haft and I ended up breaking an ear off just because I wiggled it slightly this way in the haft. It just snapped off. I didn't even hear it. I wiggled it slightly to get it loose and pulled it out, and I had snapped that off. So this tool, it would indicate, with such delicate ears, that it wasn't used over and over and over again in any kind of way that would cause it to move in this direction, especially with the lighter and thinner type of Baker points. So it would probably indicate that they were one-shot deals for projectiles. Okay, where it really wouldn't matter where they got broken, as long as they did the job the first time around, and if it survived they could reuse it. Whereas if it was a knife and you were using it a lot, it would become loose really quick, because you break off these ears and you would either have to beef up the haft or put more glue, or just make the base entirely different so this wouldn't happen. Now you could probably say the same thing with a projectile point, so that's what makes it difficult to analyze. So I'm going to be using a lot of different factors in my thinking as to why they were made this way. But in the end, the goal is, for me, is either to show or debunk the idea that the hafting element is the most critical part of a point, and not necessarily the overall design or the blade size or the blade shape, but the hafting element here. This will show us, and also not the impact fractures necessarily, but the technology of the hafting is what's going to tell us what it was used for, or the advantages or disadvantages of a certain type of base. Okay. Now when I do my testing, I expect to get a bunch of impact fractures, but they're probably mostly going to be snaps. I'm finding out after looking at other people's experiments that I'm going to need a lot more points to do my experiment. More than 6 or even 12. I'll probably have to get a couple dozen, 20 some odd. Anyway. Okay. So that's where that's going. One more thing to clear up here. When I was doing drawings of the Tomahawks, I made a little mistake on the handle for a Tomahawk on the friction fit. Let me try to do a little bit better. Okay, this distance here, okay, that can't be too short. Okay, that has to be substantial. I think I made this distance here too short. If you look in the archaeological record, some handles are even curved and quite thick, and the celt is placed low. Know what I mean? For this friction fit. All right, but there are ways to reduce the space above the celt. Okay. If you look at it from the front view, and here's the void for the celt. The celt only makes contact at the top and bottom, as you all probably know. It's made wider so that the sides of the celt don't spread open the hole that you put in there. Okay. Now, above here, a lot of times this is made at the intersection of two branches or a crotch. Okay, so you have the crotch grain in here. Okay, which makes it a lot stronger. Also, if there's a branch that has grown, you know, off to the side, leaving a knot, you can put the hole just below that knot, and it will resist a tendency to split. You know what I mean? So that's two ways you can make the top of this handle the crotch wood or with a knot. Now on mine, let's see, you can't really see it very well, but there's a knot here. There's also one below it right there. But I chose it. It had two branches coming out. It had a big old knot here, so that's where I put the hole here. Now, I need to probably widen out the sides, because when I start impacting, especially with a piece of antler in there, it's going to want to split. Now you can also, of course, lash around the top with rawhide around the very top. But I think it's probably not necessary in most cases if you design the handle so there's either a burl at the top, a crotch wood, or a knot just above the opening. Okay, just a slight clarification there, because you know, I know some people's gears were going in their brains and thinking, wait, you know, and they're right. What's to prevent this celt from splitting everything when you impact? You know, especially over and over again if you're carving, or if you hit something really hard like a bone. What's to prevent it from splitting? You're only going to get to use it once or twice, which is also the disadvantage of my idea. You know, with the hafted point. I mean, you might not be able to use it more than once. This could just break off. Okay. It looks kind of weak, and you're right, it is. But if you hit soft tissue, especially in the abdomen or the neck of your opponent, it's not going to snap off, usually. Okay? But if you do hit a large bone or the skull or whatever, I don't doubt that this will snap off and be kind of weak, which may lead to, you know, designing something a lot heavier. You know, maybe even thick enough to be a knife handle. So that the handle of the knife is very similar to one of these celts, and you just put either a you know, willow leaf shape blade in there. Let's see, let me do this better. To scale, willow leaf. You can also do a deal like this, or you could even do a crescent blade. Excuse me. You know what I mean? On the front of this. Especially if this inserted piece is the size of a knife handle. Large. A large item like this. Excuse me. So you get the idea on that. Okay. So that's just a clarification on that. I will get into making tomahawks, I guess, in another video. Add that to my list. But there you go. One more time here. I got on the Macaweedle style club, I've got 57 joules, which is more than anything on the list, except the 60 joules on the heavy dart, 3472 grains, going at 51 miles an hour. Okay, that's 60 joules. Yep, in kinetic energy. So it's more than the club. But I could swing the club a lot harder than this. Well, maybe not a lot. Let's say I could swing the club if I got into shape and really practice on it. I can get it way up above this, I think. And that's what my goal is also. I'm trying to get back into shape. I'm trying to get into running so I can shoot while running and that sort of thing. It really increases the energy of the weapons. And the thrusting spears also. Now with the just pushing the thrusting spear just with that slow velocity, okay, 17.65 miles per hour, right? I got 25 joules of kinetic energy, which is, you know, more than this upper category of darts on this side, just by thrusting. Okay, so that gives you an idea of what I'm doing and what I'm trying to compare this to, and why I'm doing these other side projects along with the study on the atlatl darts themselves and the atlatl construction too. I'm in the process of making another atlatl. This one's elm. I think this one though is a little bit I don't know, maybe too short. I wanted to make a longer one, but I'll probably stick with that. I got another piece here I want to make. This is mulberry, this is elm. I want to make a really long atlatl just to see what it does. Okay, so there, that's where I am on that, and I'm continuing to shoot darts to get better and more accurate at shooting them. But like I said in the previous video, I think I'm going to have to use a bow to fire the darts in a consistent way, and I'm still in the process of making that bow. I've got one made. I think this bow is well, I got one in the process of being made. This bow, I think it's a hop hornbeam. I found it here locally in the recycle yard waste collection center. It had a bunch of insect holes. I've pretty much got them all out, except for maybe a few. It does have a knot, and I had to make it on the in reverse too. This here is actually the outside of the limb, and I split it in half, and this is the inside, so it's kind of a backwards type bow, but it's the longest one I had. I think this particular bow is, let's see, I don't want to guess. It's 74 inches long. 74 inches, so I can probably get like a 32-inch draw or a 34-inch draw. And if it's only 40 pounds, it shouldn't put too much strain on this back here. Okay, so we'll see how that works. So that's why I've got some delays If that doesn't work, I'll just get some lumber from the hardware store and make a bow out of either red oak or yellow pine even. Just get a really long piece of yellow pine. Something so I can do the test with. Okay, that's it.